You're listening to Unmuted with Papamutes.
Welcome to Papamutes, everybody. Today's guest on the Papamutes podcast is Steve Sciulli. Steve is an accomplished musician and composer. Steve has been playing music all over the country for more than 4 decades. He's old as crust. Steve is so old he took his driver's license test on a dinosaur. I could say that because Steve is a friend of mine from the old neighborhood, a wonderful place called Bloomfield in the heart of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Steve is on the podcast today to talk about his botanical musical compositions, incorporating his music in association with live sounds generated by plants. That's right, plants. Don't touch that dial. You want to stay tuned in for this one, or tuned up, whatever works for you. All joking aside, Steve is a great guy, a talented musician, and I'm happy to have him on the podcast. Steve, welcome to Papamutes.
Oh, it's great to be here on a Sunday early afternoon.
It's a beautiful day. What's the weather there? It's cold here, about 35.
It's actually quite beautiful outside. The snow sparkles, and the dog loves it, and there's quiet all around. So, the winter is a nice blanket of silence.
Now, you're just outside of Pittsburgh, right? Or are
That's
you?
correct, up north.
So, what is a botanical musician in your description?
It's a word that I made up because I needed some sort of descriptive sentence when I sent people various things for bookings. But basically, I lately I've been trying to collaborate with other species, interspecies collaboration. One way to do that is with plants. So early on, about 6 or 7 years ago, I found a group of people who were able to develop a device that would read the electronic or the electrical signals that are generated naturally on all living things, including plants. And these devices would measure the electrical signals as they move through the leaves and down through the roots, connecting a current, and turn these electrical signals into MIDI, musical instrument digital interface, for musical instruments to understand. So from there, I can give them voices. The plants give me the signal, and I give them the voice in which to sing. But what I found out after early experimentation was that it's a true collaboration, because whatever the plants were playing, I would pick up a flute or an instrument, a synthesizer, or whatever instrument I had lying around, and I would perform with them. And I found that the plants were actually listening and offering harmonies, offering space. I would offer the plant some space to develop motifs or themes, and then I would accompany it, and the plant would come back with a harmony to whatever I was playing, or if it wanted to take a lead line, I would become familiar enough with its little signals that it wanted to take a solo. So a botanical musician is two things: one that plays music with plants, or the plant itself as it's playing the music.
So, what are you attaching to the plants?
Well,
In other words, what are you coming out of, and what are you attaching to
I
the
have
actual plant?
several devices. The one I was trying to get to work today, it comes from an experimental community, Domifer, in Italy. They've been developing plant sensors since the 1970s. I have others that come from California and others that come from Philadelphia. But this was the one I was going to use today, but the plants aren't speaking. So basically, I don't know if you could see this or not, but I'll pull these out. And this goes into
Okay.
the root of the plant, touches the root, and the clip touches the leaf.
Kind of like a prong for people who are
It
listening,
is.
not seeing.
It is.
Like a prong. Okay.
And other devices use little sticky pads that go directly on the leaves. So it all depends on the device. But the interesting thing, of course, is manipulating the sound. The, and listening to the harmonics and listening to the little subtle differences that the plants develop. Uh, it's also, I found, it's kind of in a way curious because when we started with the plants, a little background on it. I had the
Hmm.
device for a number of weeks before I jumped into it. I had to prioritize because I was working on an album at the time. The album was called High in the Mountain, and one song I was working on was called Driftwood Maps, and on that particular album, I decided to play every instrument, even if I've never touched the instrument before. So I would either buy, borrow, or rent an instrument. An example would be a banjo or a mandolin or an
Okay.
instrument of that nature. So one song in particular, Driftwood Maps, was really difficult for me to play on instruments I've never played before. So it took a couple of days of trying to come up with how to perform the lead motif. Uh, at one point, I got so frustrated, I decided to turn the gear off and just go chill out. And that's when I noticed, oh, I have the plant thing sitting there. Let me listen to the plants, and maybe that'll just help me drift off a little bit and come up with ways to do what I needed to do. So as we plugged the plant in, within a period of a few minutes, the plant started playing back to me what I was struggling to play down in the studio. It was playing the actual song I was trying to work on. So at that point, I realized, oh, geez, this thing is listening, and it's communicating. It's trying to shake my hand to tell me that it's indeed listening to me. That was both a revelation as well as frightening because I realized at that point that the plants are always listening. It's never passive. It's always something that's offering feedback, whether we hear it or not. So at that point, I decided to leave the plants on for a number of hours, including into the night. And as the Earth rotated into evening, you could hear the differences in the textures and the speed in which the plant was corresponding. Even simple things like cloud cover over the sun made a massive difference
Hmm.
in what we were listening to. If I was in the back room and I heard a change in the modality or the melodic structure, uh, I realized that the dog just walked into the room where the plants were, and the plants were reacting to another entity in the room. So it's
Now,
a
are you? Excuse me for are you?
no.
When you say the plants are talking or making sounds or what have you, where is it coming from? Is it coming out of the plant? How are you hearing it? Is it through the
Right, that's what I
speakers, through
said.
the plant?
Right. The plant is offering me the electrical signal, meaning
Okay.
note on, duration of the note, note
Okay.
off. But this device will offer something very basic in which what the plant is actually hearing. But to me, it offers there's no coloration or so it offers a kind of sonic fatigue after a while.
Hmm.
So you can also hook it in via MIDI. So at that point, it can go into any type of musical instrument that offers MIDI, like software-based synthesizers or pretty much anything these days.
Okay.
And so at that point, you could give it choices to what it wants to play. Usually, you can't fight the plant. So if I give it a sound that that I think is pleasant and I want to hear, and the plant doesn't want to play it, well, then I have to switch voices until I find something that the plant finds more enjoyable to interact with.
Now,
One,
would
one,
someone else be able to hear that,
oh yeah,
or
yeah,
is it
yeah, yeah.
just? I mean, like a non-musician, would they be able to hear this plant's vibration, so to speak,
Of
or
course,
sounds?
it's like another any other musician sitting there playing music. It's coming through an amplifier or it's coming
Hmm.
through
Okay.
headphones.
Okay.
It's. I go more towards leaning towards using this sound as a form of stress reduction and meditation and relaxation